welcome to Season 3 of Mary for the Ages podcast. I'm your host, Mary, and I am so very glad that you are here with me. I am just overwhelmed by the wonderful people that we have on this season of the podcast. This podcast season is all about people who have walked through the supernatural and have not only walked in the supernatural, but have done it well at a great personal price and with great personal process, and have done so in, as far as I know, a healthy way. We're going to be touching on all sorts of supernatural and interesting types of topics, and I can't wait to get started. So buckle up and enjoy. Hi there, I'm Mary, and this is my episode of Season 3 of the Mary for the Ages podcast. So I began a spiritual journey I began one when I was 3, and then by the grace of God, I began another one about 10 years ago, after going through what some people might call a rebirth and some people might call a spiritual awakening. That's what this podcast is about. It's about actually lengths of time, acceleration, process, transition, and the supernatural. And that's what this season is going to be all about. Because when I met Jesus in my backyard when I was 3 years old, I didn't have a grid. And I wasn't raised in an environment where there really was much of a grid for that. And that's okay. Most people aren't, but God can become your grid if you let him. But the problem was I didn't let him become my grid. And so when I joined that journey again in 2016, which is now almost 10 years ago. I know we shouldn't speak of such things, but here we are. When I began again in 2016, a lot of things came online for me very, very quickly. A lot of spiritual gifts became really online for me, and my awareness of the Trinity and my awareness of God really started to go through the roof very quickly. But in tandem with that, I also became aware that in the spiritual realm, not everything is as it seems. I became very quickly and uniquely aware that, if you are hearing something or seeing something, it has usually one of three sources: God, you, or something else. It could be an angel or a darker entity. And so I became aware very, very quickly that not everything was as it seemed, and that everything had to be tested, poked around, looked at, taken care of, examined, tested, all the things. And that became really, really overwhelming for a long time, because even the knowledge that there could be something that was supernatural, that was not God, really made me respond to things with not just fear and trembling, but also with such a reverence for understanding that not everything was God, and not wanting to say something was God when it wasn't. And so, I've been over here on my little process journey for a decade, and and that's not to say that any of that was particularly new for me, but that refinement process has been going on for about 10 years. And I'm fond of Matthew 5 in the Message, and one of the Beatitudes in the Message says, "You're blessed when you get your inside world put right, because then you can see God on the outside." And that phrase really sums up my journey of the more I attend to myself, the more I set myself in order, the more rightly ordered things are around me, and the more peace, calm, and lack of chaos there is in conjunction with such things. And so rather than, boldly announcing what I see in the spiritual realm without any forethought, or putting prophetic words on the internet without any testing, weighing, thoughtfulness, running things past other people, there's been a formation in me where there's been a confidence that has been built over time. And we don't talk about this a whole lot in either Christianity or in spirituality or spiritual spaces. A lot of times we don't talk about this. And we have a lot of people that will jump online and get rolling without any formation, without an understanding that certain things are not right and certain things are, and that not everything that speaks is God, and that not everything that speaks is darkness, and that not everything that speaks is you, that usually there's some level of a crossover effect that's happening. Whereas you receive spiritual information, you have to distinguish and learn to discern the source. Now, my best tip on that is that being seated with Christ in high and heavenly places and being united with Christ is probably going to be your best bet. And really understanding 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John are also really your best bets, and in learning to discern what is and isn't God. But we live in the internet age. We live in a time where, man, there's a lot out there and there's a lot available. And even just learning to discern what's available is a lot. It's just a lot. It's a lot to figure out what something is. And so I think the temptation for a lot of people is actually, particularly in religious circles, it's just not to engage with anything spiritual, or it's to overengage and call everything darkness, or it's to underengage and think that everything is God. And none of those responses are necessarily true. And I think, too, a lot of people who, like me, were really looking at a verse here. A lot of people who were really brought online very quickly into a spiritual experience that was initiated by the Spirit of God. There's still this overwhelm and this fear of getting it wrong, not being good enough, not being able to discern, not being able to trust yourself, not being able to trust God. In the process, the temptation then is to shrink back from what we don't know rather than press into God, who will lead us into all truth. We see in 1 Corinthians 14, however, that the Apostle Paul really didn't have time for nonsense. He was not a nonsense kind of guy. Let's just be honest. The Apostle Paul was not into nonsense. He was a no-nonsense sort of fellow. But he says, pursue love. This is in 1 Corinthians 14. Pursue love and use your ambition to try to get spiritual gifts, but especially that you might prophesy. This is because those who speak in a tongue don't speak to people, but to God, etc. Verse 3, those who prophesy speak to people, building them up and giving them encouragement and comfort. And in verse 5, I wish all of you spoke in tongues, but I rather that you could prophesy. Those who prophesy are more important than those who speak in tongues unless they can interpret them, so that the church could be built up. And now there's plenty of, anti-tongues videos on the internet. We're not here for that, because he said, I wish all of you could speak in tongues. But I would say that we are commanded by God, if you want to take a religious tack with this, we are commanded by God to pursue spiritual gifts. And so what does it look like to pursue a spiritual gift and to do it well? I would argue that there's three things. One, do what Paul did and pursue love, because you will never miss it when you are pursuing love. You might be off, but God is love, and he will draw you back into where you are supposed to be. The other thing is that I'm looking at more verses. 1 Thessalonians 5:21, do not despise prophecy, but test everything and hold fast to what is good. You have to weigh all your words. You have to weigh your experiences. You have to weigh what you're experiencing supernaturally. And you have to know that not everything is God and not everything is good. So let's see here. The third thing would be to be willing to go on a process with God, which is what ironically, the Apostle Paul did. I have a longer video on this on my YouTube channel, but in Galatians 2:1, after Paul has an encounter with God, he then says, "Then after 14 years, I went to Jerusalem again." That verse, after 14 years, speaks of a consecrational process that the Apostle Paul went through. He didn't go straight from an encounter with Jesus to writing letters and that set the world on fire and that changed systems and that challenged systems. Instead, he went on a process with God to get himself sorted out. And that is something we don't talk about a whole lot, is that sometimes the length of process is more than we think. It's not to say that God doesn't do short-term processes or do acceleration. That's not what I'm saying. But there is a value in allowing God to lead you through a formational process. And so for me, I have been on my own little journey here. I fully expect to journey with the Lord and to be in formational process. At this point, I'm just like, process is it. Like, we are on a process. But I just want to offer on this season some people who I know have been on formational processes and who have really good fruit in their private, personal lives that I know of. I don't know everyone super personally that will be on this season, but there are a lot of people in a lot of different arenas. And as we talk about what might feel like a sticky or a controversial or a unique spiritual process, I want to bring people to the table who are not just having a cool experience or being all these things, but people who have actually walked through a formational process with God. And for me, learning to hear the voice of God has been a lifelong journey that will not quit. Learning to see spiritually is the same. I have seen spiritually since I was 3. I am still learning. I am still on a journey. I won't always get it right, but I can test everything and hold fast to what is good. And the people that are on this episode and this time of the podcast are people that I know have walked through major process in their own personal lives and who have been deeply marked and deeply transformed by their own process with God. So that will be this season as we touch on supernatural topics, from deliverance to prophecy to quantum mechanics to, well, I mean, it's going to get a little bit crazy, but I want you to hear from me that wholeness, process, and formation are essential to learning to hold fast to what is good and how to test everything. So buckle up. It's going to be a great season. And if you have been on the fence about supernatural, whether because you've seen something really unhealthy or because you have questions about how to hold fast to what is good, or because you're in a season where you are hungry and chasing after more, this season of the podcast is going to be so rich. And I have already recorded several episodes at the time of my own podcast recording. There's so much beautiful momentum on these guests, and so I just know that you are going to get so much from their wisdom. Thank you so much for joining me at Married for the Ages podcast. I have so enjoyed hosting these conversations and getting to know these amazing guests. Please find them and connect with them online. And if you are looking for more resources, I have free resources on my site at maryfortheages.com, MARIfortheages.com. I also have some free and paid courses on that site, as well as a free and member-based Substack subscription at Mary for the Ages, MARI for the Ages. And I would love to see you there. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe. We are a small but mighty little team over here, and your rate and review of this podcast helps us so much. See you next time.